Testing. 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 Bienvenidos mis amigos inteligentes. Welcome back to Tea and Lit. In today's video, we're going to be doing a review of this book, Mexican Gothic, by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. So grab yourselves a cuppa and a copy. Grab yourselves a cuppa and a copy, and vamos a entrar en eso. First of all, I just want to show you my beautiful Doctor Who mug. This was given to me by two of my favorite people in the whole world. It's got Dr. 12 and Clara Oswald on there. 12, who am I kidding? That's 11. Silly girl. Anyway, enjoy your tea. Let's talk about this book. So when I heard the descriptions of this book, I didn't think I was going to be super into it. Basically, it tells the story of our main character, Noemi, which is a beautiful name, whose cousin writes her this mysterious letter saying that... Let's back up. The story is about our main character named Noemi, whose cousin Catalina is a newlywed. And Catalina writes Noemi this letter saying, things are kind of weird, and I'm seeing ghosts, and I'm hearing things inside the walls, and like there's weird stuff going on, can you come? And so Noemi decides to leave Mexico City and go see her cousin up in the country, up a mountain that used to be a mine, where she meets the Doyles. Now, the Doyles are the family that lives in this old Victorian house that Catalina has married, like the heir to the fortune, basically. So when I heard that synopsis, I was like, well, that's gonna be fine, but it didn't intrigue me that much. This book was read for the Dark Academics Book Club in the month of September, so that's why I picked it up. I typically like the suggestions that the ladies have, and I trust their judgment on books, both in the Dark Academics Book Club, but also for each individual woman's channel. I really like their taste in books. So that's why I picked up this book. I am filming this in September. It's more gothic than it is, I think, like a family story, which I found interesting. It definitely seems like it would be more in like the vein of like a more modern Mary Shelley almost. Like it kind of has that like dark, creepy, spooky vibe. It is very gothic. It's a very aesthetic book. The old Victorian house and the grounds of the old Victorian house. It is a very aesthetic book. The characters and the plot a little less fantastic, but the atmosphere of this book is absolutely magnificent and perfect for the time of year when I'm reading this. That, I think, what else? The Doyles. So when I first met the Doyles, when they first mentioned the Doyles, I was like, I'm sorry, is this taking place in Mexico City? Who's named Doyle in Mexico? I was so surprised, but they are from England and they came to the New World to, you know, find more fortune. I thought kind of the, what is the word I'm looking for? Telling the story that had such colonial overtones, I thought was really interesting. And I don't always imagine Mexico and Central America being invaded by the English, for lack of a better term. You know, you think of the Spaniards, you think of the Portuguese in South America, but not so much the English. And so it was that kind of interested me quite a bit. I was so grateful to get this book before the Dark Academics Book Club started because I was on the waiting list for the library for so long, and I know that I was number 1 of 7 the last I checked. So I have to get this book back to the library ASAP to make sure that more people can read this book. I will give you my evaluation in just a second, but a few things that I wanted to talk about. Noemi is our main character. She is a very young woman. She's a socialite. She's really interested in like learning things. So she definitely has dark academia vibes in that sense, that it's a gothic book and she's always changing her major and she wants to learn new things. And at the time that we meet her, she's studying anthropology, but she is a socialite. Her father is really wealthy, and so she goes to all the society parties and stuff of Mexico City, and she wears these beautiful dresses and So she's just wanting to do that sort of thing. Catalina is a little bit older than Noemi, so Noemi has a lot of wonderful memories growing up with her cousin, telling her stories and playing with her hair and doing all of those like older cousin sort of things that would happen, or older sister sorts of things. Noemi and Catalina were kind of raised together because Catalina's parents both died tragically. That's not like a super relevant point in the book, but it is mentioned that like that's character motivation for her. And she sort of jumps into this relationship with Virgil Doyle, and it seems very rushed, and Noemi's father does not approve. Then Catalina gets whisked away, basically. One of the reasons that Noemi's father doesn't approve is because the Doyles own a defunct mine that isn't making any money. And Catalina has money because Noemi has money. There was a family business that was like paint and chemicals and stuff, and dies. And so Catalina has money from her parents, and the Doyles don't have any money, and so he's worried that Virgil's only after her for the paycheck, basically. And also, society people don't want people marrying below their society level, their class level, or whatever. Virgil has a dad named Howard who reminded me quite a lot of Henry VIII in his later years of life, kind of just like decrepit and pestilous and repulsive. That's kind of how I describe Howard. And then there's Florence, who is Virgil's aunt, and she seems very buttoned up, very serious. She reminds me of somebody that I've seen in a movie or something, but I can't think of the character. But she's very much like by the book, follows the rules. She's the lady of the household, so she kind of has that air about her. Like, these are my rules and you have to follow them when Noemi goes there. And Noemi doesn't obviously want to follow all the rules because that's what a main character would do. And who else? And then there's Francis. Francis is Florence's son and also kind of our primary love interest in this book. So those are your characters. Honestly, I don't think really any of them were fully fleshed out. This book is really, really short. So it's 301 pages, but the margins are really large. So it's not a long read, but I would have liked more space dedicated to the development of the characters. They all kind of fell flat for me. There were 2 other characters that were slightly less significant, 3 other characters that were slightly less significant, but one of them I'll talk about more in a little bit because I really thought she was interesting, but that's just because of like my own perspective on life. And then, as I mentioned, the atmosphere was phenomenal. So she has to take the train out. Oh, it takes place in like the 1940s, I think it was. So she takes the train out. That's not it because they had just gotten electricity. I don't remember when it was. It was in the early 1900s. It was before the war, Lexi. Obviously. It wasn't the 1940s. I'm clearly confusing something else I'm reading. But it was like the early 1900s. They hadn't gotten to the war yet. Like, not even the first war, I don't think. They were during the Mexican Civil War, they talked about it. I don't remember exactly when that was. It doesn't matter. It's old school. And she has to take the train out to the village, and then she has to drive up this mountain in like an old Hollywood car to get to this Victorian house that's like very eerie and creepy and dark and gloomy and foggy. It's got a crypt and a graveyard in the backyard, and so it gives you all of those like spooky vibes that I thought was absolutely amazing. So that was great. The story is Noemi getting to Catalina, trying to figure out what exactly is happening. Who are these ghosts that Catalina is seeing? Who are the voices in the wall that Catalina is hearing? And this family who's like very creepy and weird and off. Howard is interested in eugenics. If you ever need a deep dive into something insane, I would highly recommend you spend some time Googling eugenics and some of the views of the eugenicists. And there's one moment when Howard first meets Noemi, when he's having her in her home, having a dinner for her in honor of her visit, and he says something like, you're far darker than your cousin, to like kind of put that colorism in there. It's described that Catalina is a little bit more fair-skinned and she's got auburn hair, while Noemi is dark-skinned with dark hair. And the boldness of Howard to have a dinner guest over to say such a thing, I was just like, whoa. But maybe that's how Europeans of the time behaved. They just didn't have good manners. Or in general, eugenicists, people who are attracted to that sort of philosophy and science, just don't really understand decorum, I suppose. So, yeah, those are the characters. That is the atmosphere. That is kind of the plot without spoiling it. So I'm going to go through my ranking system, and then we will do kind of a spoiler talk, okay? So the quality of writing, I gave a 3. I really did not care for the dialogue in this book. It was kind of inorganic. It didn't seem sensible, and there were several spots, particularly towards the end, where they only spoke English in the house because the family spoke English, but Francis knew Spanish. And so towards the end of the book, when they're kind of plotting the climax of the book, it would say like they said this in Spanish, and I'm sure that like, that was a decision made to like make it more accessible to everybody. But there are some like basic Spanish expressions that lots of people know, and you know, you read, I'm looking at my bookshelf. I feel like, I don't remember what book I read recently, but it was like full of French words and French expressions. Oh, Dorian Gray. And so it's like, you really can throw a little bit of Spanish in there and people will be accepting of it, even if you translate it. So I just wish that there was a little bit more Spanish. There was like basically none that I can remember, and I just didn't really like that. If it's going to be called Mexican Gothic, written by a Hispanic female author, like I would have preferred that it say that. I think she's Hispanic. She's from Canada. She's written a bunch of books. I'll have to Google her later. Anyway, so the quality of writing I gave to it a 3. Like I said, I would have liked to see more. I'll get to that in a minute. I think that it could have been better. The ease of reading I gave a 4. One of the cool things that was in there was lots of names of different plants. Plant life plays a huge role, particularly fungus life plays a huge role in this book. And so I enjoyed seeing like kind of some of the Latin names. Noemi's dad, basically the family business is chemistry, so she includes some chemistry things. There were a couple of vocabulary words that I had a difficult time with that I marked, I think. Let me see. Somnambulistic. I don't know what that means. Noemi slept fitfully, afraid she'd launch into another somnambulistic escapade. So words like that. There was one other one that I had marked in here somewhere. Oh, this is something that bothered me. In terms of the quality of writing, it says here, your mother won't tell me if Catalina is awake and Virgil wants to throttle me. Did they use that expression back then? Throttle? That seems like a very modern term. Maybe it was one they used. Maybe not. I can't find my other word. I think I've gone too far. But that's fine. There were just a few words that were like a little bit difficult for me to understand. But since I have you here, the pacing was good-ish. I gave it a 3. It started okay, kind of. She set the world really nicely. The middle section was fine, but then the end, it seemed very rushed. The climax felt like it was just like a dump of stuff. Like it didn't seem to evolve naturally or organically, and it just felt like a dump, and I didn't really love that. The plot, I gave a 3. I think that the plot could be good. I don't love the way it's been described. I think that there's room for improvement in the plot. There were some things that almost felt like plot holes because there was like just a few questions that like didn't make a lot of sense, how things evolved and happened, that it was kind of like, huh? So I didn't love that. The characters, I gave it 2. They were not fleshed out very well, any of them really. Noemi was probably best. Frances was probably second best. But there was like a lot of questions left about these characters, and I would have liked to know more, especially about like Virgil and even Catalina, who you would think is like a main character considering she's the catalyst for this whole story. But you just didn't get much about any of them, really. They just seemed very skeletal. Next is the atmosphere. I gave it 5. As I said, absolutely loved the Victorian house on top of the mountain with the mist and the graveyard and all of that stuff was wonderful. The enjoyability, I gave a 4. Now, part of the reason I think I enjoyed this book is that I read it after 1984. 1984 had me jacked up to the 9s. Just so you know, I don't know if it's up yet, but we do have a 1984 discussion and review and everything. So I will link those. But I think I enjoyed this book more because I'm reading it after 1984. If I read this book after a book that I enjoyed, I probably would have been less affectionate towards it. In terms of insightfulness, I gave it a 4. Again, that colonialism was really interesting. I would say the science behind some of the things in the science that inspired this story, I thought was really interesting. I think mentioning eugenics, I don't read about eugenics in novels very often, so that was a lot of fun to see. So I think that this story had a lot to share about kind of racism and the degradation of culture in a way when colonialists come in. I thought was really interesting. You see how the Doyles have kind of this carelessness about the Mexicans that live in the area, and they own the mine, and there were 2 sicknesses that took over, and a bunch of people in the mines died, but they were Mexican workers, and they weren't treated as well as the workers that had come with them from England. And so this kind of disregard for Black and brown life, I thought was really insightful. So I gave that a 4. Logic, I gave a 3. Again, there were a few plot holes that were just kind of like, okay, that's kind of weird. I don't know what's going on here. So Logic gave a 3. The book cover, I gave a 5. It is an absolutely spectacular book cover. I may put something in here to show it better because I'm sure you're getting reflective light here, but the cover is beautiful. And I was reading this with my little snuggle bug, and he's like, Lexi, you look like the cover. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I actually totally didn't mean to dress this way on purpose, but that works out really well. She's got like that maroonish dress, and I've got my maroonish dress going. So yeah, thought the book cover was beautiful. All in all, I gave this a 3. It could have been like a 3.5. I don't do half stars. I round down because I'm a witch. But I would give this book a 3. It is not the best book I've ever read in my life, and I don't think it's going to find its way onto my bookshelf, but it was fine. It was a good read to pick up at the library, and yeah, I think the girls at the Dark Academics Book Club felt the same way. I heard lots of 3s. Kira gave it a 5, but she gave it a 5 because it met all of her needs for a Gothic book, which it totally does. It gives you all of the aesthetic and the atmosphere you could possibly want. So there's that. Now let's talk a couple of spoilers that I wanted to mention, or a couple of things that were specific to the story that I just didn't want to talk about before we got into spoilers. Okay, so I want to discuss the character of Marta. She was my favorite character, and I want to explain why. I'm Catholic, and the word Catholic comes from the word universal in Latin, I think. And so although like there are like skeleton frames for Catholicism, it definitely accepts some of the fleshed out business of a previous culture. So one of the greatest examples of this is St. Patrick. When he went to Ireland, the Celts worshipped the moon, or the moon god, or moon goddess, I don't know. And they were very attached to their icon of the moon. And so when St. Patrick came in, he just drew a cross in the middle of the moon and said, okay, well, we've now baptized it. And so now we associate that cross with a circle around it as the Celtic cross. So in a lot of ways, when the Catholic Church was evangelizing people of different cultures, they still honored in some way, shape, or form the previous culture. Something similar happened in Scandinavia. At the end of Ragnarok, not the Marvel movie, but like the Norse view of the end of the world, 2 people go and live in a tree. And so when the Christians went up to evangelize them, they said, well, that is the start of our story, Adam and Eve. And if you ever, I don't remember where I watched this or where I read this or what I was doing, but I found it really interesting to learn about the Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, in Mexico, and how this cultural thing that they had at the time in the early days, about honoring their dead with these massive festivals and face paints and food and pilgrimages to the cemeteries, these huge cultural things. And they said, well, let's put it on November 2nd, which is All Souls Day in the Catholic Church. And so that sort of view of culture has always fascinated me, particularly as a religious person. And so in this book, we meet Marta, who's like the witch doctor, and she has, I think it's St. Matthew or St. Luke, and she asks Noemi for cigarettes, and she says, well, St. Luke really likes these cigarettes. And kind of the cultural, like, mysticism, or I don't know, this like cross of the different cultures. Marta is like the witch doctor. I think I said that. And first of all, I always love the witch doctor character. The old wise woman in the village who holds all the stories and you have to go to for all of your potions and teas and everything. I always love that character. And so Marta was my favorite character in the book because she was like the keeper of everything, of all knowledge of the village. And that's just a character in general that I enjoy reading in a story. She didn't play a huge role, but she played enough of a role that I noticed her. So, but the way she talks about kind of like the natural things in the area, the natural plants and medicines that she uses to help people in the area, and how she's connected to like the traditional doctor in the area. Like there's a regularly educated doctor in the area, and how the two of them kind of play off of each other. It's very briefly described how like sometimes he can't help people, so he sends them to her, or sometimes she'll send people his way. And so kind of that balance of like natural medicine and traditional medicine, like modern medicine, was really beautiful. And then also her being the keeper of the village's stories was really beautiful. And then also that cultural connection of like, we're Catholic, but also we have our own old school traditions, I thought was really special. One of the things that really bothered me in here though, is that the author did not capitalize the word mass, as in the Catholic mass, like our Sunday service. We capitalize that word just for publishers and authors in the future. And then she mentioned something about how Noemi went to her first communion, or what, Noemi or Catalina, but then didn't mention anything after that. And like, my judgmental Catholic side went, well, maybe that's why she doesn't know you should capitalize the word mass, because you stopped at first communion and you're really supposed to keep going until after confirmation, but forever. I did love that she mentioned that she wore a mantilla, because I also wear a veil at mass. Mine is white. So yeah, those were just a couple of like little judgmental Catholic things that I had, because oh, here's another one. She divorced you. So it turns out that Virgil is actually divorced. There's actually two of these. Virgil is divorced, and then he married Catalina. Now, in the Catholic Church, we don't do divorce and remarriage. That's not a thing we do. And so it mentioned nothing about getting any sort of, what is it called? What is it called? The nulling of the marriage. I can't think. Annullity? Whatever. None of the nulling of the marriage, whatever I'm trying to say. And then later in the book, it's like, well, they said something about Catalina being suicidal, and she said, and Noemi said, my cousin's not suicidal, we're Catholic. And it's true, suicide is a sin in the Catholic Church, but it was like, you're picking and choosing your theology here, and you're not even describing it well. The thing that got me with the suicide one, though, I've noticed with myself that sometimes, like, I feel a certain way about something, and it's just, like, a genuine conviction that I have, but then I describe it as, well, we're Catholic, we don't do that sort of thing, or I'm Catholic, I don't do that sort of thing. And people are like, well, you don't have to... So, for example, I don't drink, and the church is against drinking to drunkenness. You should, have your wits about you. There's no qualms with drinking casually or socially, but you should not drink to drunkenness. It's kind of like not respectful to yourself or to God, and I guess it's a bad example. I don't know. But there have been times where I've been like, well, I'm Catholic, I don't do this sort of thing, and people are like, well, why? That's not a very good explanation, and I guess it's not. I didn't realize it until I read this book, where I was like, I mean, yeah, suicide is a sin, but it's a sin because it's a violation against life, and we just love life. You know? This probably makes no sense. For all of you who are not Catholic and have no Catholic background, you're probably like, why is she just rambling about religion? But religion is kind of a big deal to Hispanic people. I will say, I go to church with a lot of Hispanic people, and let me tell you something, it's a very big deal to them. I guess that's all I wanted to mention in this book. I think so. Didn't love it. Probably am not going to buy it, but I think it's fine. If you... Oh, Susurrus. It's a delightful Gothic book, but I don't think that it's the best book in the world. I hope I edit this well, because I just rambled on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Clearly I'm out of my routine of filming. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more dark academia books. Write in the comments below if you read this book and what you thought of it. And if you haven't read it, you can tell me that I don't need to talk about my religion so much. Because, like, I don't, to be honest with you. And yeah. I'll catch you guys next time. Oh, pick up our newsletter. It's in the description box.